Survivor's ready. If anybody has a hidden immunity idol and you want to play it, now would be the time to do so.
The queen stays queen.
You said rustle feathers.
Did you do that?
Yeah. I'm supposed to calamity.
We have ripe bananas all the time.
Dude, my prize isn't even $1 million. My prize was that I fell in love in this game. Love at first sight. Her name is Candace.
You officially go down as the dumbest survivor ever.
Welcome to Not Game, All Personnel. Hey, we are a Survivor podcast here to talk about all things Survivor, more specifically the events of technically the past 2 weeks. I'm Nathan. This is Tony. How you doing, Tony? How was your week off?
Hey, my week off was lovely. Thanksgiving, man. We just didn't text each other. This is essentially what happened. We just didn't message each other, so we didn't record. That's kind of how it happened. But I had a good week off. We've been recording every week since August, the beginning of August. I think August 2nd was the kickoff of Big Brother. So, yeah, always appreciate a day off.
Yeah, no, that did hit me, especially because we're getting close to the end of this season. I think we might have like 2 or 3 weeks left. Might be just 2. Oh, maybe I don't know, 2 or 3. And it did hit me. I was like, oh, we're gonna take a break. This is gonna be nice.
Yeah.
So
it's so freeing when we don't have to it's. I'm gonna stop complaining.
We love the show. We love recording podcasts for all our listeners. But yeah, we technically have 2 weeks to talk about. Although we were just talking before we hit record. It was probably an okay week to skip last week. Not super eventful. We saw Kendra get voted out, which I'll just say for our tier ranking that we have been doing, we're pretty good because the last 2 weeks were 2 of the 3 of our bottom tier, being Kendra and Bruce. So good for us of being right. But yeah, I mean, Kendra felt like, I think whenever she was going to get voted out, that was always going to be a filler episode. Like, no offense to her, but I think there was never going to be a lot of strategy involved with her getting voted out. It was just it had to happen eventually, and it just happened.
I feel like the only interesting thing because I rewatched it today because I was like, well, I should somewhat remember what happened last week.
Good for you.
Yeah, look at me go. Look at my research.
Proud of you.
I watched a TV show. I think the only big thing is there was the debate between Jake or Kendra, and the decision came down to, like, Julie was the only one that really wanted Jake, and everybody else seemed to want, well, Dee, I think specifically wanted to get rid of Kendra because Kendra was going after Dee. So I think that did expose maybe some power dynamics within the group because Jake is still in the game. So
yeah, that
says a lot. It really does. But
it seems every week to be Jake as the backup plan.
Which is a great spot to be in, potentially, in theory.
It's fascinating. I have a lot of questions and observations about his game because every single week he seems to be on the chopping block, doesn't go home. And I think my biggest question for him is how much of it is because of his game, or is he just getting lucky every single week and they're defaulting to someone else? But yeah, is there anything else that you noticed from last week's episode other than that you want to bring up before we dive into, I think, the more recent episode?
Yes, a couple things.
Yeah.
Austin was willing to he gave his idol to Julie when they split up into those 3 separate groups that competed in the challenge. So I think that just shows how loyal those 4 are. That he has 2, so like that's worth noting. But he was still able to part with a lot, or willing to part with that 1. So that definitely matters. Other than that, I remember last week being really annoyed. Like, when are we gonna have just a straight up Survivor? Like, everybody has their vote, everybody has to make a decision. Idols might be in play. Like, I felt like so much they're complicating things by being like the bottom 3 potentially lose their vote. The bottom, like, whatever, these people lose their vote. And so this week I think was refreshing because we didn't have any of that nonsense. Felt like just a classic Survivor episode, just back to the basics, and I think that was needed.
Yes, because last week it was Emily and Katurah that lost their vote. And Austin lied about losing his vote, actually had it. nothing really came from that as far as,
Well,
there
they
was
didn't read all the
no.
votes, so he got away with
Right.
it.
Yes, correct. So good for him, I guess. But yeah, I think seeing Kendra go on that week almost made me forget about that aspect, just because it was like, okay, she was probably going to go either this week, next week. She wasn't going to make it much
Mhm.
farther, so it probably didn't affect it. But I think if someone who had a bigger chance of winning would have went home because of a twist like that, because 3 people lost their vote, I think I would have been a little more upset by that, because it is getting
Mhm.
like, yeah, can we just have everyone vote? Because I think, is this the first? This is the first time that everyone has had a vote
Yeah,
like
and
together.
that I I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that, honestly, because there's a part of me that really enjoys the idea that um like there is risk to the game, and doing poorly in certain things makes you lose your vote or whatever. But I think I said this last time we met. I think there needs to be um another punishment. Like that thing seems like the only thing that they're ever really mixing up. Like they mix up groups and things like that, but then the punishment is always you lose your vote. There's no other alternative to that, and I think that is a big thing that's missing.
Yeah, especially because like in essence that is at core what Survivor is. So it's like if you can't vote someone out, then like what are you, like what are we doing? What are we actually playing? Because I think
Mhm.
it's not even so much the punishment, but it's also that prevents those people from strategizing. And
Mhm.
I know they still can and they still should if they don't have a vote, but like your vote is so powerful for how the season operates, and
Mhm.
like the gameplay and everything. So it's just like, to take that away, you are robbing them, and but also us as the audience from seeing that. Like, who knows? There could have been a bigger play last week if Emily Katura had a little more power, but we'll never
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, but ultimately, I think it's interesting. It's not old Survivor. I've rewatched some episodes from season 10, with some friends recently, and it does feel like a vastly different game. Honestly, just how people play it as well. I think people are more. This season's a little bit different, and we'll get into that in this next episode, I think. But I feel like like stabbing people in the back and switching alliances is so much more common now, where it's seen as such a big thing in the early seasons. It feels like so.
Sure.
It's very interesting to watch a season that's that old and then compare it to this, where this one is so much more flashy, and it tries to make every it tries to make every episode entertaining, because every episode has its own little thing,
Mm-hmm.
which I see from the entertainment standpoint, but from the like integrity of the game, almost I don't love it.
It feels nearly impossible to play, if I'm being honest. I think like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's what I've noticed in these recent seasons is there used to be people who would study the game, get really good at the game, and then apply to be on the show and have like a really good season. We used to see some of the best players because like, and I'm not saying, I think it's a little different, like it's not like Carson who 3D printed the puzzles and memorized those. But I mean, like, people who was like, if I go on Survivor, this is how I'll play. I don't think you can go to on Survivor with a game plan anymore, because
Yeah.
you never know what game you're playing. You show up for that season and you don't know the rules because they're so different every single year. So the only way to be good at it is to honestly just be adaptable. And that's not something you can plan for, prepare for. I would say luck is so much more a part of it now than
Yeah.
ever. I know, like, okay, well, if you don't want to lose your vote, then don't lose the challenge. I get that. But, like, we've even seen in recent years, you can win a challenge and still, you could lose a challenge and still be safe, and win a challenge and be nominated to vote, as we saw in season 41, where everything just got flipped. You know what I mean? So, like, there's no
Mm-hmm.
rules for even that anymore. Um, and so I think that's the part that bothers me the most, is I think we are missing out on some legendary players, because every player is almost equal now because of how random the game can be.
Yeah, I definitely think there's an argument for being adaptable is probably the most important thing, the most important ability to have in Survivor. But I definitely know what you mean. Where I can't think of any specific examples, but yeah, you could just come in and like have a specific strategy and then just ride that to the end. Whereas now, yeah, you don't know what's going to get thrown at you, and so there, what kind of preparation can you really do other than, oh, there might be a what's it called? Knowledge is power advantage, so I have to play as if there is. I don't know. Yeah, it'd be nice if they'd be able to prepare. A couple twists. That's interesting. Anyways, we should keep moving, but I'm gonna be thinking about that a lot now.
We always
How
have
there's just
so
not,
much analysis on the game as a like we can't help ourselves.
and I like to think people just skip through this part and be like, I don't care. Just
Nope,
listen
I
to the
like
rest.
I imagine people wanting just more like no, come on, go deeper on
Dig in,
the
dig
meta
in.
gaming of this season. All right, well, you want to get to this week's episode?
I do.
Okay. It finally happened. Bruce got voted out with an idol in his pocket. Perhaps fitting in some ways. I thought, because like by the end of the day, I think his biggest weakness was maybe not as much self-awareness of how people viewed him. Maybe not aware that people were plotting behind his back. So for him to go home with an idol in his pocket kind of in some ways felt right to me. I don't know if you can see that as well, but I was like, okay, that adds up, I think.
Yeah, I think it was just that's who Bruce was the entire time. I was surprised that like in his confessionals, it didn't seem like he was considering not playing it. Like even in his confessional, he's like, "I'm playing the idol. That's what's going to happen. I'm sticking around." And in my head, I was like, I would think about not playing it. I genuinely would have. If I were in his position, I would have. But yeah, he didn't give me the sense that he was thinking about it, and then he just didn't, which is bold.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say, I definitely have warmed up to him the past 2 weeks. And I think if he would have survived this tribal, I would have been tempted to make the argument that he had a better chance, So I'm
Yeah.
glad that he went home before I was able to get on mic and talk about that. But I think like last week and this week, I was like, oh, I actually see something. Like he had a couple moments of like self-realization and like, like I think I need to like reflect on who I am as a person and stuff like that. I also think I was blinded because he won immunity 2 times in a row. So like this was the first time he was actually eligible to be voted out. So, that's tough.
Yeah, I think Caleb leaned over to Kelly and was like, he's only been eligible 1 day out of the last 16 to be voted out, which is
Right.
crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the last episode, and I also wanted to mention that this like self-reflection of being overbearing. I feel like you can't take how you act in the game of Survivor and automatically be like, oh, am I overbearing in my regular life? And he just took that so much to heart, and I'm curious if like Kelly and Bruce have a decent friendship outside of the game now, or if that's like a big issue for him. But yeah, it was very interesting how hard he took that. But I mean, it was true. She said those things. She absolutely did. So I don't feel bad.
Right.
The Rebug tribe used that quite well to be like, oh yeah, he wasn't with you. She wasn't with you.
Well, I think we've talked about this before, but it is interesting how much Survivor plays into that now, of the almost like having your individual story or like redemption or like all these things. And I haven't watched a lot of older seasons in a bit, but I don't remember that being like a main focal point of those seasons of like, oh, look at how this game is changing me, and there's such an emphasis on that, and like you almost can't help but like go on the show now and like how is Survivor going to be good for me, because like I think about like some of the older players, like some of them didn't grow at all, some of them learned nothing. Actually, most of them are like still horrible people after the show. In like modern seasons, that's almost like the point of it, is like you go on Survivor to come out on the other side as a better person.
Yeah, I think that's a shift that we had like maybe in the 20s, but mostly in the 30s. I feel like we really had this big shift towards, especially the winner, their story throughout. In the 20s, the only one that I can really think about, and this is spoiling seasons if anybody's listening, like Kim was one that I know, like there was this like transformation and growth from her after she had been like divorced or something, I think. But then in the 30s, you see it in a bunch of people, I think, where their story and their growth and how Survivor changed them was such a massive part of it. And it was probably just received well. And they're like, okay, Jeff has always been in the position where he's like, I'm in Survivor to tell stories, tell the stories of the people playing.
Right.
At least since he's been in the last like 10 years, that's been his mentality. And so that's just what it is.
Yeah. So Bruce voted out in a 4-3-1. And this is a vote I think that we're gonna have to analyze from a couple different angles because there's a lot happening here. Is this one of, if not like, the bigger votes of the season? I mean, this feels pretty huge for a couple different people.
I think so. I think. Yeah, let me look back. What were some of the other votes?
I think Kelly's was big.
Kelly's was huge, but that's probably the biggest one outside of this.
Which is tough because most of the ones before that were all like pre-merge, you know. So I think we're gonna get into the bigger ones now. But this one felt like there's a couple people here where I wonder, like, it was a great move for some. I wonder if it was a good move for others. It seemed like everyone was at least in on it. And there are definitely people who the show is giving a lot of credit to, like, for this move.
Okay.
And so I think, like, this is, when we get to the end, whoever the winner is, I think this vote is going to be the starting of, like, a through line of how this person got to the end. I don't know who, I'm not saying a specific person right now, but whoever the winner is, I think this vote will affect that outcome.
Yeah, because I think this is the best chance that everybody outside Reba had to take a shot, and they chose not to take the shot.
Yes.
And I saw some tweets. I was like looking a little bit, or some Reddit post where it's like, this was the perfect decision. You absolutely can't take the shot there, and I'm not sure if I agree with that. But how do you want to do this? Do you want to go player by player? Do you want to just
this
dive
is tough.
in?
Let's just see where the conversation goes. So if we want to go player by player, I think we can. I do want to go down at some point and discuss, like, every single person. Like, was this a good move, bad move? And then we can obviously backtrack to other events that happened in this episode. But really, I mean, the credits seem to mostly go to Emily in this vote. The edit,
she had a line saying that she gets credit, right? But I went back and watched it after I finished the episode, because I was like, it feels like she was like, it was because of me, but I feel like it didn't show that it was because of her necessarily. But she had the confessional where she's like, if this works, everybody's gonna look back and be like, Emily made such a big move here, and that fascinates me. I don't know if that's what we saw.
Well, I think what I noticed was, I think the biggest thing she did was to convince Bruce to not play his idol, right? Like, she was kind of the one that was more in his ear about, like, this Julie vote, because Bruce thought it was going to be between Jake and Julie being a blind side against Julie. And I think he probably expected some votes on him, thinking that Reba thought it would be between Jake and Bruce, right? So Bruce is like, okay, they think it's between me and Jake, but we're flipping it on Julie. So I don't know if Emily can get all the credit for that, but that's at least what I kind of assumed she was talking about with all of it.
Yeah, it was interesting. So they showed the conversation of her and Katurah saying that Julie was a big threat because they call her Mama J, which I can kind of see the logic behind that.
Yeah.
And so we saw that conversation, and then I was like, oh, okay, so they're worried about her. And then a little bit later, it cut back to them, and it was Emily saying, so I still think that she's a big threat, but right now I don't know if we should take the shot, essentially. Kind of just confirming with Katurah, like, I'm still on your side and agree that she needs to go, but I'm not, I think right now we need to get rid of Bruce, which I'm not sure if Bruce is that big of a threat. So it did seem like she was the one that was making the moves and everything, but it required so many people to be a part of it. I don't know. It didn't feel like she single-handedly was doing it and would single-handedly get credit for it.
Well, I think
maybe she would, because she's in that alliance. Sorry.
Yeah. I think the credit goes to her because she actually went through with it. Because I think if she wanted to, they could have gotten Julie out. You know, I think
Mhm.
if she goes to Katura and says, "Hey, I'm not actually voting for Bruce," I think Katura has to fall in line, right? She has to vote for Julie
Mhm.
then, especially because they're on the same page. I think Jake would do the same thing
Mhm.
immediately. You know, so I do think Emily was kind of the deciding factor in that sense, where I think Jake and Katura would have had to do what other people did, but Emily was the only one who probably had a decision there.
Yeah. I now yeah, as I think about it, that makes sense. I don't know why I'm hesitant to give her full credit. She probably deserves it as we're talking about it.
Well, I think full credit, you know, I don't know. That's a different
Majority
term that
credit, maybe that's a better
sure.
way to put it.
I think the biggest surprise to me through all of this is how little credit the episode gave to Katura. And like maybe she didn't
Mhm.
have anything to do with it, but I think just like we've been waiting all season for like this moment, like who's going to go first, her or Bruce? And the fact that he went out and we're seeing it through the perspective of somebody else and not Katura, I'm kind of like, huh, this
Mhm.
feels like a little bit of a going out on a
Yeah.
whimper as far as like, oh, Katura versus Bruce, who's gonna get who's gonna get who, and she's just kind of in the background of the vote. You know, she seems just like a player, and again, like maybe she didn't have anything to do with this, so the episode can't give her credit. But I would have thought the way that they were leading up to it, that they would have at least tried to position her to be like, oh, she had a big part in this move.
Yeah, it feels like should have been the big showdown in the end, and then it didn't end up being that. Kind of like Game of Thrones. We don't need to get into that. Have you seen Game of Thrones?
I stopped midway through season 4 because
All
I
right.
was trying to catch up for season 8, and then I heard how bad it was, so I was like, well, I'm just not even going to finish the show then.
All right, then you won't even know what I'm talking about, but it's fine. It's actually kind of a good comparison, with the Night King, but that's fine. You don't need to know about it. So yeah, it's interesting that she was a part of that. She was massive in passing along that Bruce did have his idol. When
Yeah,
he was sharing it, I was like, this is a really weird reveal for him having an idol all of last episode as well. Or him having lost his idol all of last episode. And then it was like, oh, how's my lie? Blah, blah, blah. So it was an interesting little bit there. But this tribe is so leaky. Like anytime anybody says anything, they just go tell the Reba 4, and then they all know. And they just don't seem to realize that those are the 4 that are in control. And I don't know that we've seen an alliance this tight in years, honestly.
sure. Yeah. Well, and that's another question I have about this episode and where the season is going. My question is, are they as strong or as big as threats as we think they are? And
Hmm.
here's the only reason I ask this is because Emily seems to be good at this game. She seems to have good reads, she knows how to like execute these moves, but the fact that she doesn't feel threatened by them yet, is she just like too overly confident, or are we just being misguided to think that they actually don't have as big a chance to win as we think they do? Now,
It's frustrating.
I don't think I can say the same about Jake and Katura, okay? Because I don't know if I would at this point say that they would win over the Reba 4, but like in Emily's position, I don't know. Like I could see her at the end and like do the Reba 4 really have a better resume than her at this point?
I think the hard part is the Reba 4 seems so solid. And like you said, that's how they've been presented this entire time. Emily brought up like, "Oh, do we go after D?" And they were both like, "We don't want to do that." And like, I think they shut it down in a decent way. But she has, I feel like, floated that option from a couple angles, and every single time it's been shot down. Like I don't. Everything we've seen is to believe that they are solid 4. They're willing to
Mhm.
share the 2 idols. They all know about the 2 idols, and that's all there is to it. And so it's hard. I see what you're saying, and maybe I'm just letting CBS lull me to sleep. But it's hard for me to think that that's the case. I think this might be her blind spot right now.
And I think there's a good chance of that too. Does anyone know about Austin's 2 idols other than the Reba 4? Like does Emily know? I don't think so, right?
They wouldn't unless Kelly told out people about the advantage, and I can't remember if she did.
Oh, sure, because that yes.
So then they know about the one.
I doubt she did. I really do.
Yeah.
At least I don't think it would have got back to Emily. Yeah, because I think it's tough because like you look at Jake's position, and I don't think Jake has a position. Like, like he doesn't have much decisions. I think he's just like, tell me who to vote for, and as long as it's not me, like that's all he can do at this point. I think Katurah more towards Jake than Emily. I think she might have a little more sway. I think like Emily is really the one that's making this call as far as like, no, I'm not going to turn on the Reba 4 yet. And I think for her and Katurah, it feels like the two of them are both just hoping that they become the 5th, and by 5, one of them will turn. That kind of feels like what it's going to be, because especially if you're losing numbers, you are already down. Well, I mean, this week would have been a 4-4 split if but I do think for Emily too, is it valuable to keep Bruce and try to make an alliance with 3 people that don't really want to work together? Like, that's the tough part too.
So you just said that it would be a 4-4 split. If they had flipped, it wouldn't have been a 4-4 split this week.
No. I'm just saying, like, that's how.
Gotcha. Okay.
If the 4 of them wanted to turn on Reba.
Got it.
Like, okay, this was the last chance that it could have been even close, because now you're down in numbers.
Yeah, I think it's a lot to risk to assume that you are going to be that 5th person, because if it's Jake, if it's Bruce, well, it wouldn't be Bruce. Well, it could be Bruce in that scenario. Nope, it couldn't be. So if it was Jake or Katurah, they could both win immunity, and then you, if you're Emily, you get booted at 6. So like, I don't know. To risk it all to just hope that they all break apart seems very, very risky to me. Especially this feels like the only chance. This felt like the shot that needed to be taken. To me, genuinely, I feel like you needed to at least weaken that alliance or bring it down a number at least. But then you blow up all of the relationships. Like, it is a very complicated thing, and I don't know if there's a perfect route.
That's the other thing too. I think for Emily's sake is that she does technically have that trio with her, Austin, and Drew. Now, I think we all assume that's secondary to the Reba 4, but like in Emily's mind, like they have been loyal to each other. So there could be a level of her just not understanding that they're 4 strong, like that strong, and she might assume that she's stronger with the 2 guys, because like she knows that Jake and Katurah aren't in that spot. You know what I mean? So I think Emily's correct in assuming of the 3, she is highest relationally. Now, that doesn't mean they can't turn on her and vote her out before Jake. Like, obviously they could. But I think she's correct in knowing that. And I think, too, with, this whole girls' night that we had, which we will have to discuss this guy's night. That was just ridiculous. But I don't know. Like,
fart.
That's true. Once the girls aren't around, that's
all we do is we just fart.
But my point is, I think like Emily is connected enough relationally where I think that could be a blinder for her, or it could be good for her, because I think she does have relationships with everyone. And I don't think Katurah can say the same. I don't think Jake can say the same. And so I think she's correct in assuming the pecking order, but that could be bad because she probably is being naive to how strong everyone else actually is.
Ultimately, I feel like it was a gamble, for sure, which that's part of the game. Doing it the other way would have, I don't know if it would have improved her position, but it hopefully would have hurt the other side. I don't think Julie was the one to go for if they were going for one either, personally. But that's what they kind of went with. Yeah, and I think the one cool thing about this decision is she made the move to make Bruce not play her idol, but she didn't like blindside anybody other than him. Like, she didn't hurt any relationships in the game currently. She chose not to take a shot that they're probably not even aware that shot was considered. Like, she did a lot and made some big decisions that I feel like don't have a ton of massive repercussions immediately.
Yeah, and I do think that is something to keep in mind because I think I'm very curious how this jury's going to vote. Because we even saw in this episode, like, Julie kind of emphasized how much she was struggling because, it's like, oh, they call me mama out here, now I'm lying to Kendra and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I did say this a couple of weeks ago with the Kelly vote. I do think this jury might be a little more bitter than previous ones, especially if you get Drew up there who doesn't really feel like he knows how to connect emotionally, to explain his case.
Yeah.
And so I do wonder if that's going to be a big factor because Emily seems to be covering her tracks with the jury, Like, it doesn't... I think if we get to the end, like, let's say she's sitting in the final 3 with 2 Reba people, I could see people being more bitter towards the Reba people than her, which could be an exciting factor.
Absolutely. I think she's definitely been much better than everybody else when people are getting booted out. I think Bruce is the first one where I could see him being a little upset because she was the one that kind of convinced him not to play that idol. Or at least that's how she says it. So that would be my only thing there. Yeah, this jury, all of them seemed pretty hurt when they got voted out, except maybe Caleb. Caleb probably saw it coming a little bit, but Kelly was pretty hurt. Kendra was pretty hurt. And I feel like there's so much emphasis on how close all these people are and how much they love each other. And I think that's going to be, that's just a recipe for a bitter jury, which makes you not want to make moves and not do anything crazy because you're just going to make everybody mad and hurt feelings. You almost want to be that person that just hasn't done anything at the end of this sort of game. Like you always say, your goal is to get jury votes. And if the jury wants you to not backstab anyone, don't backstab anyone, and you might win even though you didn't do anything.
Sure. Yeah. I think the other thing with that too is, like, you brought up Caleb. Caleb's very persuasive. We've seen that. That's a strength of his. The fact that they usually call the first person in Ponderosa the mayor of Ponderosa, often because of how much sway they're able to have, because, like, they're the first ones, so they get to really chat with everyone as they come back to Ponderosa. Caleb's probably a big Emily fan, right? Like,
oh yeah,
she had nothing to do with him going out, and they have strong ties. So, like, if she makes it to the end, there's, in my mind, a 0% chance he doesn't vote for her to win. And that's someone who you would want on the jury to help sway your case.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's always such a complicated thing about the jury, is that, like, if there's a persuasive person on the jury, they have so much sway on how the game goes. Which is how juries work generally, so not actually that big of an issue, but it's interesting.
Have you been on a jury before?
I haven't.
Me neither. I want to do it.
But I've seen Jury Duty and 12 Angry Men, so I know how it works.
2 very similar representations of how Jury Duty operates.
Absolutely.
I think we can move past this vote, probably. It's a very good analysis. Is there anything else in the episode? I'm trying to think back. I don't actually have much to say about the guys' night. I think we kind of hit it.
Just lots of farts.
Was that? I mean, there's almost never a song used in the show for a montage. That was a little newer.
I don't even think I noticed.
Yeah, because it was like, I forget what song, but some, like, 80s almost hair metal song. Like, that's what guys listen to. But, like, that doesn't happen in Survivor often. That's more of, like, a challenge thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I noticed that in the challenge usually. I didn't notice it in the episode today at all, though. Interesting.
Yeah. So that was a little bit different. But yeah, Emily won the reward, which was, good for her. So
much crying this season.
Who won immunity this week? I don't even remember.
Austin,
that was it. Because Bruce almost won. He came in second. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's not really a lot to say about it. I'm trying to think through if there's any other major key moments.
Katurah had her, like, heroic swim to the boat.
True.
That was a thing that happened, which I'm sure once you're up there and you're like, oh, I'm falling into the ocean, like, that's an intimidating thing. That scares a lot of people. But yeah, there was that whole thing where Jeff was like, you can just step off if you want. Like, they were just so Like Jeff has changed so much. I can't imagine young Jeff saying like just being like, "Oh, you can just step off. It's okay," and like comforting a person that's
No,
having a
if it
moment.
was old Jeff, he would have bribed them to take their clothes off. That's what he
That's
used to
true. That's true. They only did it once, right?
do. Yeah, I think so. Which is,
I think they.
I think about that often. I was like, that's so crazy that was just on like CBS.
I'm pretty sure they offered, if I remember the situation correctly.
Sure, but even like, can you
Does that
imagine
make it okay?
them
No, but I just want to be clear with the people listening who maybe haven't seen that season. Jeff didn't say, "All right, ladies, if you take off your clothes, you get peanut butter and jelly." No, that wasn't that wasn't quite it.
But my point is, I can't imagine that happening on Survivor today.
Oh, no chance.
That is,
No.
we've come a long way, and Jeff has, yes, much more comforting father-like figure than he might have been. At one
Yeah,
point.
at that point, he was still like a 30-year-old sleazeball with all the other 30-year-old sleazeballs out there.
Right. Yeah. Should we just take it more player by player then?
Let's do it.
Kind
I
of.
think, one thing there's a moment, and we'll get into it with player by player, I'm sure, but there was a moment between Drew and Jake where Drew called him a mobster, which probably wasn't a very fair description of him at that moment, but he's from Boston. That the game's the game.
I was gonna say that's the only reson he did it. It was like he's got a Boston accent, so therefore he's from The Departed. That's all. That's all
Yeah.
he's saying.
How the game works, which unrelated. I'm getting very sick of it. Like, it's just such a thick Boston accent, and it's just like a very annoying thing to continue to hear a lot of. It's just I'm not a fan. It makes me not like Jake the player, like how annoying the accent is. And I know that's unfair, and I feel rude about it. But that's
No,
where I'm
because the group that I watch Survivor with every week, they also hate his accent. They're like, "Oh my gosh, shut up!" It's
Stop
just so
talking.
it's so funny because it's like it's his voice. Like, what do you want him to do? But I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. It
Yeah,
sounds
it's
sounds
tough.
fake. Like it sounds like that's how someone like mocking a Boston accent would talk.
It's so and it's not like Jasmine on Big Brother where like it's insane in the confessionals, but then when you hear them talk and just like with the other people, it's like almost non-existent. It's always there. That's
Right.
how he talks. And boy, does it sound awful. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting moment. There wasn't really any sort of payoff for it. So I think that relationship between those two is something to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm.
Just because that has to matter. Like that little tiff has to mean something to me, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Jake then, because Jake continues to, in my eyes, remain at the bottom of this tribe. Week after week after week, and it seems like I said earlier, his only thing that he's got going for him is that he's survived so many votes that he could have or maybe should have gone home. So I think the question is, like, if he gets to the end, does he even have a game to explain, or is that his entire game? It's like, they left me in and I was a threat. That's why I should win.
Yeah, that's the tough part, because like you said, like I think you mentioned this earlier, did he really do anything to survive those votes? Not really. It was other people making the decision for him. And yes, it was based on maybe social interactions that they've had in the past and the certain people that were involved, but that's ultimately what it boiled down to.
Yeah.
And so yes, I think there's always something to being a target and constantly surviving. I think that's the point of the game, whether you do it or what. The social interactions that you've had throughout the game and strategic conversations have led to the point where you are getting spared repeatedly when you are always the second option. So if he makes it to the end, I think that it will always be an argument for winning. Now, whether that outvalues somebody who's actually been in control and actually made decisions in the game, completely different conversation, because I think that is valued so much more than the person who just survives unintentionally almost.
Yeah.
Like I think the conversations that he's had in the past weren't in mind to like, oh yeah, I won't get I'll like he voted for Julie, so Julie wants him out, but he didn't vote for anybody else, so none of them want him out. Like that's not an intentional choice to keep him later on. So it's unintentional in a way, I would say.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think, could he sell that to the jury? Maybe. Does he have the capability to sell that to a jury? I don't think so. You know, I don't.
He's a lawyer, though.
He is a lawyer.
Nathan, he's a lawyer.
He's also still gonna get medically evacuated. I swear. Are we gonna see?
what happened to
No, I don't know. He just started not passing out. Like he just got better. I don't know.
That's a weird thing.
It's a very weird thing that we need to bring up more because it's so bizarre.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Katurah, who's another person that
I feel like this episode is the first time in a while that she's really done anything or been a part of any conversations.
I agree. And you know, she's my last draft pick surviving, so I'm always gonna have a little bias towards her. But yeah, I mean, not feeling super strong on her lately, except for these past 2 weeks. And I think this episode specifically, we at least got some emotional arc from her, which is both with the challenge, but then also her letter from her mom, who I guess she, doesn't have a relationship with, which is very weird that Survivor would do that, right? Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I was about to say, and I was reading something right before we went on that I didn't get to finish reading, but it was Jeff addressing that on his podcast.
How she doesn't have a relationship with her mom, but then they contacted her anyways for a letter. Like that's
that feels
so many
unfair
questions.
And
yeah,
if you don't want to be in contact with somebody and it's your choice, you shouldn't be like, yeah, we don't care. Like we want the content. No, that's not how this works.
it feels like Big Brother 5 when they just throw in a long lost sibling and
yeah, or
like we're stepping on some pretty personal boundaries.
Brother 3, yeah.
That was 4
or 4. Yeah. It was
wow.
4. Or I corrected it like as you were correcting it, so get out of my face. But then also like Dick and Danielle, like it's outrageous how much these shows are just like, hey, you don't want to see this person? Sucks to suck. Here they are.
Yeah, no. So that was bizarre.
You gave me chlamydia.
Anyways, who was that? Was that Dustin and?
Yeah, it was Dustin and whatever the other dude's name was. I don't remember. That was so good.
I do kind of. There's part of me that wish Big Brother would just stoop down to that level again. Like
that's.
It used to be like because every season they would have just like a trashy twist like that.
Yep. For like a big period there.
Yeah, no, I mean it was at like 4 was the
6.
exes, 5 was the family, 6 was the
8,
secret pair,
9.
Yeah.
And then they got back to basics with 10, which I think made them throw that out in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agreed. But Katurah, yeah, I don't know. I want her to do well. I just don't see a path for her at least winning. I could see her getting to the end and maybe coming in like 3rd place, but like that's unfortunately it. And I just again with a vote like Bruce today, if you want to convince me that she's going to win the game, you got to give her more shine in this episode, and she just didn't have it, like she just doesn't have enough to her resume that we're seeing, unless it's like a secret Gabler edit or something. Like I'm just not convinced that she has the resume.
It felt like this episode gave her the background and the heart to like tell her story fully, and then she's gonna get voted out next episode. That's my prediction. I think she's probably gone next.
Ooh, interesting. Okay. We talked a lot about Emily. Is there anything more to say about her?
No, I love her. I think she's in a great position for sure. I'm trying to decide if I like how satisfied I'd be with an Emily win.
Oh, I think I would be the most satisfied with an Emily win.
I think there's a part of me that's like it feels too obvious from the like we've been trained edit wise to be like, oh, it's not going to be the obvious person early on, and early on I think she was the obvious like winner pick, just like with how much airtime she was getting, and so there's a part of me that's like, oh, that's lame. And I think that's unfair to her probably.
I think I'm trying to sort through. I would say I think it's her game to lose at this point. I
don't know if I'd go that far.
I really do. I think if she sits at the end at this moment, I think she would take it. I think the question is, does she get to the end, or is she going to be the final boss going out at fire? because I could also see something like that. But I don't know. Like, I'm very high on her, and I think she has the strongest chance right now.
Yeah, I'm big on the 4. I don't think the 4 are gonna break up. I think a big part, and going back to Jake a little bit, I think one of the big parts that Jake that's kept him, because we already talked about Jake, right?
Yeah.
One of the big things that kept him on the bottom is the fact that there was such a secure top. So like, yes, if you voting out certain people, you'd think it would mix things up, but the fact that the people in control and the alliance in control is so secure, there's nothing you can do to get out of that. Like, I just don't see a path for that. So similarly, that hurts Emily and Katurah, obviously.
Sure. Okay, well, who out of the Reba 4 do you want to talk about next then?
Let's talk about Drew. So Drew is still just being the mouthpiece of that entire alliance, it feels like to me, strategically. And it's a very interesting edit. We don't talk about it. It's very interesting to see that he's the one that they're emphasizing so much, because Austin is the person who has all of these different things. He's winning immunities. It feels like Austin is in the best position because he's super close to D, super close to Drew. Like, I feel like he's the closest to each of these people. I think D would. Oh, I don't know. D might say Mama J, but anyways, it feels like he's positioned best within that alliance, and yet it feels like he hasn't done anything strategically in the game, because it feels like Drew has gotten every single conversation about strategy, and it's always been framed around him. And what that means, I'm not sure, but it's interesting to see that that's how it's being portrayed with that alliance.
Yeah, I think my observation with Drew is I think that's how it's being presented to us, but I don't know if I fully think that is what's happening. Because I think, like, if you think about the strategic moves, can you give him majority credit for anything, really? Like, a lot of it is him being the mouthpiece, but it's decisions that, like, Dee's throwing out, you know? Julie has a lot to say. Emily's involved in some things, you know? So I think, like, that's the fascinating thing, is, like, I don't know what they're trying to tell us about him, because it does feel like they want us to be like, oh, he's the strategist. But I'm like, I don't know if he is. I think he's just getting the airtime of the strategist.
I think he's definitely partially the strategist. I think it's possible that it's being overblown a little bit, because, like you said, I feel like D is the decisive one, and D, kind of what D says goes. And I don't know if they just don't want to make her mad or disagree with her or what that is. But if she's firm on something, that's what they're gonna do. But I feel like Drew was always the one that was like, oh, we got to get rid of these people to make this an idol. Like, it's always been from his perspective when it comes to things like that. And so I wonder if he is just the one who's presenting the strategy or focused on the strategy more than anyone, and he's like setting the examples, and then they make a group decision, or setting the options, and then they make a group decision kind of thing.
I guess because, like, you look at the votes, you know, I think, like, when J Maya went, okay, that wasn't necessarily, I think, like, her having a part of Austin's, you know, idol or whatever, that was part of it, but, like, we didn't even really see that. A lot of that was coming from Julie and D, who were on the tribe swap with her and trying to get her out. Then you have, like, the Sifu vote, which Drew definitely took a back seat and was said, as long as it's not me. Kelly, perhaps.
I would argue it was a strategic backseat, though.
Agreed. But I don't think, you know, that credit doesn't go to him.
Yep, just worth noting.
And then same thing like with Kendra last week, where he wanted Jake out, but the girls got their way. So I think that's the thing, is, like, I'm not seeing a resume from him. I'm seeing a lot of strategy talk.
I think he thought Jake out was what was happening because of a conversation that he had with Mama J. And then there was the confusion. I think that's what it was more. I don't think he was like, we need to get Jake out.
Either way,
I'm hearing conflicting things. What we need to be on the same page.
Yeah. Either way, though, I don't think he gets any credit for last week.
Okay.
And so I think
D gets the credit for sure.
That's my thing, is, like, he is the mouthpiece, but is anyone listening to what he's saying? Because I'm not seeing it. I see very little that he has actually done to sway anyone. I see very little that he has done to, like, make moves. I see him being a part of this and being a logical thinker and agreeing and all these things. But, like, I don't know. Like, I think Emily, I think D, I would even say Julie. I think all of those have a better strategic game than he does at this point.
You think Austin would? Did you say?
I didn't say Austin. I don't know about Austin.
Okay, cool. I didn't think you did, but I wanted to make sure that I heard you properly.
Yes.
Yeah, which is what makes it so interesting is that it just doesn't seem like he should be the one driving the ship like he has been. Another interesting thing that they showed was them eating all the rice on Jake last week.
Oh yeah.
That was another thing that I wanted to mention, and I knew it would come up eventually, or I'd think of it eventually. Because it's I don't know. Because he's getting this like super strategist edit.
Mm-hmm.
D, I think, is getting kind of a villain edit, and also for some reason, Mama J is getting kind of this sympathetic mother of the tribe edit, and then Austin is getting this like not comp beast, but he just has all the stuff.
Austin feels like he's not really getting a huge edit, and it feels like he should be more on display, which is very confusing because of how much he has actually affected the game.
Yeah, Drew feels like he should be getting the least of the spotlight. Him and Mama J should be split on like the least of the spotlight in that tribe to me. But yet he's getting the most. And it's very like, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's actually what it has been, like in the accumulation of conversations that they've had. He has ultimately been the strategist. And yes, it's not showing that in the conversations, but they want to communicate that through the edit, or if they're trying to prop him up for some reason as kind of that final boss edit. Not that we talk about edit on this show.
You've only said the word a dozen times in the past 2 minutes, but you know.
I know, it's crazy because
it never affects the way it never affects the way we view or talk about the show.
No, never. I've never talked about
Here's my biggest prediction with Drew, and this is probably just like a hot take. Not even a take. This is a hot prediction that could be very well wrong. I think he's going to make it to the final 3, but he's going to be shocked by not getting any jury votes because it's either a bitter jury, he can't communicate properly because he's so, binary in his way of communicating and not as emotionally connected to people. I think he's going to not do very well in the final 3. That's my prediction.
Kind of a Xander vibe, maybe?
Perhaps, but maybe even more so, because I think they clearly want us to think he's doing really well, or you know what I mean? Like, you're right. Like, they're giving us a lot of him for some reason, but I am just so unconvinced that he's going to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's Drew.
That's a lot of Drew.
Austin, we kind of covered. I don't know that I have that much
no,
more to add.
mean, it's shocking that we should be sold on him to potentially win this game, but we're not.
Yeah.
Now he has an immunity win, multiple advantages, holding on to 2 idols within the strongest 4 alliance, but for whatever reason, I don't think he's at the top of this alliance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that is. It's crazy.
And it just makes me think, is he just not know what he's doing strategically, and Drew is driving it. Whatever. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Julie is someone who at one point I thought had a good chance. I really don't know. I can't tell what's going to happen with her because I could also see her being blindsided. I could see her being the one to flip on the final 4. I kind of like her position, but I'm also not strong on her just because it does feel like her name is getting thrown out more so than other people in her alliance.
Yeah, it is pushing her up as a threat, which I think is interesting because that could mean 2 things, of course. That could mean they're saying she is a threat, or they're making an excuse for why she's about to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she really hasn't done much as a player when you really look at it. She's well liked, sure. That matters for something, I guess, but I think a lot of times it makes you more a target than anything else.
Yeah.
She's gotten second in a couple competitions. That ultimately doesn't really matter at all. Especially because both times she lost to Bruce. So yeah, I feel like on paper she's not that big of a threat, and they seem worried about her. But But I think she's the first to go out of that 4, honestly.
I could see that. I really could. Yeah, and then there's D, who was oddly quiet this episode.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I think that kind of made me pump the brakes a little bit on her, because I've been big on her as far as like, okay, I can see this leading towards something. You know, she feels more of the mobster than Jake does as far as like,
Yeah, honestly.
here's my alliance, they do what I say. But then this episode just not very vocal in a lot of things, just kind of like, yep, sounds good to me. So I don't know what to make of that, but I don't know. I think she's got a strong chance, unless people do, people talked about her being a threat at some point. Her name was definitely thrown out there. And so it's just going to be interesting to see if that comes back around.
Yeah, she's it's like the closest thing to a villain we have this season, I would say. Because I don't even think they try to edit people into villains anymore, because I think they just intentionally try not to, or they just don't bring people who could do that. Because I thought Bruce could be an interesting villain type, but then he's more sympathetic than that. But like,
Yeah.
Even just seeing the part, like her laughing about eating more food than her and Drew eating more food of Jake's, it's like, okay, it feels like you're trying to paint her as a bad person, or like a not great. Yeah, it feels like she should be in the conversations. To me, she's the making the decisions.
Yeah.
And yet it's not showing us that. I don't understand it. I don't understand how this entire group is being represented, because it feels disingenuous.
I think I like it though, because it feels like a lot of different people could win this game. And
yeah,
I think, we obviously still have some of the biggest tribal councils to happen and to take place, that will, could sell us on almost anyone at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think either way, we're going to have a satisfying winner this season. And I'm just so curious to see how it all wraps up, because it does feel like a lot of open threads that they're kind of leaving for us. And I don't know. The more that, and again, I hate that we've talked about the edit so much, but we can't help it. But like, once you like see it, and like once you start noticing the way that they lay out these storylines, it's like you just need some closure. And I think that's again why I'm so upset about this Katurah Bruce situation, because it's like, that was not closure. You hyped this up for what? Yeah.
Not even like a shot of her smiling as he left or anything like. I don't remember any big moment that she had being excited about it.
She did kind of like smile, like laugh a little with people, but everyone did. Like
everyone
Drew,
was like cheering, which
felt
like a bit much.
It was a bit much, but like she was an equal with everyone at that point. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's end and talk about this tier ranking that we got.
Okay, let's do it.
Before we wrap up this podcast. Okay, so, well, like I said earlier, we are doing great because 2 of the people that we had in the bottom, Kendra and Bruce, are voted out. So good for us. Now here's the issue. We got 7 people left. Last time we did this, there was 9, so we had a 3-3-3. So we'll have to do like a 3-2-2 or some form of that. Do you have a strong preference?
Go for a 2-3-2.
2-3-2. Okay, that's what I was going to ask. All right, so here's what we currently have, and again, every week we're going to revise this. So I'll list off what we had the previous. Well, this was 2 weeks ago. Okay, the top tier we had Emily, Drew, and D. In the middle tier we had Austin, Julie, and Katurah, and the bottom now it's just Jake. So automatically, we're going to have to put someone in the bottom tier with Jake, unless we want to move Jake. Do we still like Jake down in the bottom tier?
Yeah, I do.
I agree with that.
And I would say Katurah's the easy pick to drop.
That's what I was going to say. I don't love it, but I think out of this grouping, like, she has to be at the bottom with Jake, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's just go with that. So Katurah's moving down to the bottom tier. So now in the middle, we have 2 Austin, and Julie. And in the top, we have 3, Emily, Drew, and Dee. So we'll have to move someone from the top down to the middle. But let me first ask this. Do we think Austin and Julie are still in the middle tier, or do we think one of them should move up?
Comfortable Julie in the middle tier.
Mm-hmm.
Austin, it's so hard to separate what all the stuff he has. So say Austin, I'm unsure about this one, so we're gonna dig into it a little bit.
Yeah.
Say Austin makes it to final 3. Do you have confidence that he's able to communicate his game in a convincing way to win the jury?
Not really. Not really. Even though I think he does have the strongest resume.
Yeah. Well, even when you look at his resume, he found an idol. Like, that's worth something for sure. He was forced into getting another potential idol, and then the other 2 got voted out, which neither time was it communicated that it was partially to get him a full idol. It was just a fun byproduct of it. He's won an immunity, which matters for sure. But and he's been very loyal. I feel like that's really all he has. And how much is all of that worth would be interesting. I guess it's a lot of stuff, so it probably would be valuable. I think leave him in the middle tier as well.
Okay. So then we have Emily, Drew, and Dee in the top tier. One of them would have to move down. Now, I think my default is Drew.
Drew to drop down.
Yeah. I mean,
So that's the way I read the game. I absolutely agree. I think Dee is in more control.
Uh-huh.
They're telling us his story, and he's getting this strategist perception for a reason. And so that's what I feel like they're telling me that he's a big threat. And so it's really, do we want to believe that or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've made my case. I don't buy it. Like, I really don't. Especially,
Right.
like, I already said Emily's my number 1 right now. I think if we're pinning Drew against Dee, I think Dee does circles around him at Final Tribal.
Yeah, like he'll have things to say, but she'll just shut him up. Like, okay, yeah, let's drop Drew. I'm comfortable with that. Just picturing that is such a treat.
All right, so we dropped Katurah down to bottom tier with Jake. Which Jake also started off in the middle tier at one point. It's important to note. And we dropped him eventually. Drew was in the middle tier at one point. He went up the last time and went back down. Austin at one point was at the top as well and then went down. So we're sitting with Emily and Dee as our top tier. And the next week we'll probably just have a 2-2-2, which will be nice and clean. So by our predictions, I don't know if this is a prediction, but if our tier list is accurate week by week, Katurah or Jake should go home next week, and we'll have to put Austin, Julie, or Drew in the bottom. But who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
Goodness.
This is fun. I kind of like this.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Let's do it.
Anything else? Anything Survivor related?
No.
Cool. Well, that's all I got. Good episode. A lot to discuss. I'm looking forward to the end of this season. Shaping up to be a good one. I hope. I always hope that, but this one especially. It's been good. I've warmed up to it a lot, and I'm hoping for a strong ending.
Mm-hmm.
All right. For more episodes, visit NotGameOnPersonal.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere else the podcast. Really follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube at NGAP Pod. That's at NGAP Pod. I'm Nathan. This is Tony, and we will see you next week.
45 seasons, 2 great pals, 1 podcast.